I'm Lissa, and I work at SpaceApe. And I design UI. I've been designing UI for quite a long time now, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about the specifics of designing UI for free-to-play games. Clearly, it's very different from any other, and I want to tell you why I love and I sometimes hate it. Now, why am I qualified to talk about this? Well, I began my career with graphic design, so that's what I studied at uni. I got myself a job as an intern in game design. Then I transitioned from that for UI design, but that was for PC. This was back in Brazil, where I'm originally from. And finally, I ended up in mobile UI. I feel like this is easier for you to hear me, right? Yeah, I'll just stay around. Yeah, it's okay. So finally, I transitioned my way into mobile UI. This means that I've been making free-to-play games for, well, a long time, 9 years, almost 10 years, since 2010. This is kind of like almost the entirety of my career. Now, what are free-to-play games? How many of you are working currently on a company that's making free-to-play games? Cool, most of you know this then. I'll just skim past. But yeah, free-to-play games are obviously free. That's one of the main characteristics. They're living services, and because they're free, this means that the player doesn't really pay for it up front, and you need to keep proving your worth, which means that you need to add features and change the way you do things to actually add value so that people will spend. They also have escalating complexity for the same reason. And they're very stat-centric most of the time. So you're always looking at stats like conversion, retention, making sure that people are spending, making sure that they are happy and that they want to come back. And finally, lately we've been seeing an increasing quality ramp in free-to-play games, and players are noticing and they are expecting free-to-play games to be of that high quality. Now, the thing is, when you're working as a UI designer making free-to-play games, you don't have a specific set of features that you, at the end, kind of nicely wrap up and then move on to the next project. You end up doing a lot of changes. Things kind of don't always work out as they should, which means that there's kind of a lot of hurt and a lot of love that goes into it. And that's kind of what I want to talk about the pain and the pleasure of working with UI for free-to-play games specifically. Now, the pain number one is probably one of the easiest to fall into. It's kind of like a trap that sometimes we get, and it's avoiding dark patterns. But, okay, what are dark patterns? Basically, dark patterns are ways that you design things to kind of unknowingly make the player do things they don't want to do. So things like having a big-ass, buy this button with a tiny, almost invisible cancel button underneath it. When the player is kind of they already have a pretty huge cognitive load of playing the game and trying to decide what to do things. Sometimes they'll just go and tap on the brightest thing on the screen, and sometimes that will mean spending when they don't want to, or engaging in an activity that they don't want to do. So that's a dark pattern. It's very sneaky, and sometimes it's on purpose, sometimes we just don't notice it. This is kind of related to the fact that games are living services, so we need to add new features, and those features need to be stat-centric because we need to keep the conversion up, need to keep the retention up, so sometimes it's easier to fall into this trap. Now, the cause of this pain is, like I said, the necessity to improve stats, and this comes from a product, from a company level. And the fact that honest design can be quite challenging. Sometimes we as designers end up, going into these traps just because it's easier, and sometimes you don't even notice that it's actually creating a pain point for a user until you actually put it to test. And negotiating this with product or with a manager or with direction, you need negotiating skills to negotiate, so that can be quite challenging as well. Now, the right medicine for this is firstly understand deeply that this is an ethical problem, that you should be always aware of it, and becoming an educator about it. Understanding that dark patterns are an ethical problem and making sure that everyone else understands that deeply is the right way to do it. And in the end, you will end up defending your player tooth and nail. Now, how do you turn it into pleasure? Well, you advocate for your players. I'm really sorry that you can't really read, but my fonts didn't make it in and some of the formatting was lost. But that says advocate for your players. The way that you do this is by making sure that the company shares these same values of, an ethical issue. And once everyone's kind of like in on your game, that's just a matter of team play. Everyone will start advocating and making some sense out of it. And at the end, that's what it is. It's just defending what your player. Now, related to this in a way is my second pain, which can be quite painful, and it's playtesting your designs. It's something that's becoming more usual and more normal to do. We are doing it just like routinely. And I want to share a little experience about playtesting with you guys. Hopefully this will format correctly, but we use Playtest Cloud a lot, and we can do like user research in person and everything else. This is a specific thing that we did with Playtest Cloud, so we got the video back, and I was trying to like sell this specific feature, and I was really super happy with my design. Everyone in the company got it, and it was pretty easy. But this particular person, at all of these points in 20 minutes, they were presented with this feature. It was a quest feature. And that's when they were introduced to the concept, even though before they were, like, it was already in the screen, but they weren't introduced to it. That's when they were introduced to it. That's when she mentions out loud that she saw the quest update, doesn't do anything about it. That's when she saw the button for the first time, didn't do anything about it. That's when she saw the button for the second time, again, did not tap. The third time, still not tapping. And then a fourth time, and she says something about it. Then a fifth time. And in those 20 minutes, this feature that we designed, we crafted, we cared about it, was not engaged with at all. But the thing is, we picked it up very early because we play tested it. And this is quite painful, but it means that being exposed to something as a player is not the same thing as understanding what you've been exposed to. And usually, some people, I don't know if everyone feels that way, but some people sometimes think that the player somehow is stupid, or like the user is stupid. That's a complete lie. Your design is stupid. It's like, you need to internalize that, even though it's a very painful truth. As soon as you grasp that, the easier it will be. Now, this is related to the fact that players are expecting an increasing quality in games, and a feature that's not engaging, or a button that doesn't make sense, or if you don't flag post it so that people know where to go, they're not at all. And in the increasing complexity as well of a free-to-play game, where towards the end, the elder features that you have, social and guilds and events and temporary leaderboards, it's very easy to get lost among all of that. If you don't take care, they won't engage. Now, the testing is extremely important because we need to optimize UX. And we need to test for understandability and conversion. So the fact that the player is like kind of mentioning out loud that they saw the thing, but they're still not tapping on it, that gives us kind of like a diagnostic of what's going on. But the most painful thing is sending your babies out to get hurt, because it's like, you worked on it for so long, and then someone just doesn't tap on that thing and doesn't even engage with the feature. It's really painful. Now, the right medicine for this is just to do it more often. The more you do, the easier it gets, and the more you understand the process and learn with how they are interacting. But also you need to learn how to ask the right questions, both before they play and after, in surveys and any way that you can engage with them. And also learn to empathize deeply and fully, because again, it's not the player that's stupid, it's your design. Now, how do you turn it into pleasure? You learn to cherish it. I'm not talking about BDSM in any way. It's just you learn to accept the pain and the hurt by asking the right questions, by listening to what they're saying with no judgment. That's the first and most important thing. And by learning to empathize with what they're saying. So sometimes they're not coming from a place of ignorance. It's just because you didn't explain well enough. And the final point that I want to talk about is coping with uncertainty. And this is the one that took me the longest, I think, to get used to, because this is where the beauty, but also the terrible hurt comes from working in free-to-play games. Is just there's a big level of uncertainty that's always permeating our work, and this kind of like comes from this flow, which is just like a normal iterative game dev process, right? I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen this or are familiar with this. But basically you start by prototyping an idea, playtesting it, iterating on it until you're ready to implement it in your final version. And then from that last one back to iteration, that's usually because of like a change in stats or a test that didn't go very well, and then you're back in the process again. So it's never ending. You don't really feel like you have a good enough set of features and just like, yeah, it's okay, I'm just gonna have a beer and go home now, because it's always continuing. Now, this is because games, free-to-play games are living services, and like I said, it's an ongoing process. And the main causes of playing in this scenario are fluctuating trends in the market. So this not necessarily means that your game is wrong, but sometimes you're experiencing a trend that players want a specific set of features and they want to engage in a specific way, and you need to kind of adapt to that. And problems observed in playtests, like the one that I mentioned before, will also get you right back into the iterative process, and you will have to deal with it and figure out how to do it. Changes in product design that sometimes just come because because of a change in the game vision. So the game director may say, okay, now we were considering that this is the vision, but now we want to go in a different way and we want the player to feel differently, and this is what we're going to do. And then you're going to have to go and adapt all of your designs. But also change in game stats. And this is the one that took me the longest to cope, because it's like, it's just numbers and you feel like it's so, impersonal, but that's what you're striving for, and that's how you stay alive in this industry. And when you learn to accept and understand it, it just makes it easier. Now, the right medicine for this, I feel, is basically learning how to communicate better so that all of these unforeseen changes are easier to negotiate and also easier for you to understand. And that's why you need to get educated on product design and economy. If you're a UI designer and a UX designer, you need to be knowledgeable. You don't need to, you don't have to become a product person, but being knowledgeable about it will make negotiating changes a hell of a lot easier. And also learn to have fun prototyping and expanding your skill set so that these changes can be caught even before they make it to software. So if you can prototype things earlier and not implement them fully, so you can make like click-through prototypes so that you can do some playtesting beforehand, it will make your life and your devs' lives easier. But also try to meditate, because sometimes it's really hard. So just take a moment and take care of your brain. Now, how I turn it into pleasure is learning how to embrace the process fully and entirely. And for me, this was a combination of learning some soft skills like management, time management, communication, public speaking, and all of that. Also some product design, like I mentioned, so that you can actually talk to people about this a little bit more clearly. I personally started learning how to program, so that made me, a little bit more empathetic about how hard it is to sometimes go in and implement a full feature, so only to figure out that like you just throw that away. So catching that early on is a lot better. And also understand a bit more about data analysis. Most companies that are making free-to-play games today have an analytics crew. Befriend them, bring some coffee, make friends, and start learning how to interpret stats, not just by asking them, but by looking at them yourselves. Now, the main thing that I want to point out here is that pain really doesn't have to be painful. And free-to-play, honestly, it's been my entire career, and I truly, deeply love working with it because of these challenges. But in the beginning, it can be quite daunting and kind of overwhelming because you don't know how to deal with it. It's uncertain, and you're changing your stuff all the time. But that's still very pleasurable if you learn how to deal with it. So if you're having a challenge avoiding dark patterns, just remember that you need to advocate for your players and make sure that your whole team understands that. If it's painful stress testing your designs and you're like looking at players really like trashing them in their feedback, just learn to cherish it. Understand that you're not always right. If you're having trouble coping with uncertainty, embrace the process. Learn to take the pain as it comes and turn it into something that can help you grow and learn. Hopefully this made some sense. And thank you very much.
Lissa, we could actually have a couple of minutes for questions, so if anyone has some questions, we have one down.
What software do you use for quick prototyping?
Sorry, excuse me, what?
What software do you use for quick prototyping?
That depends at what stage in the development I am and who I'm going to be testing for. Sometimes I will make a quick prototype in like Balsamic. If it's a very low fidelity prototype, you know, it's just a wireframe, and that's just, usually it's for internal testing, or sometimes I'll get someone's specific opinion with a little click through. But I also use Principle for more like animated stuff. So I design on Sketch and then I use Principle. And sometimes we make like quick prototypes straight up in Unity, but not necessarily implemented with like the backend and stuff. Just, it depends on which level, like what's easier at the moment, you know, the fidelity of the prototype.
Great, thank you. Any more questions? You have one down.
So, the first thing, do you have any favorite book about design? And second thing is that if you have to balance like informative value with beauty, or you can always arrive to something that does both well.
My favorite book about design is Celia Hoden's A Gamer's Brain. Did she already do her talk here? I'm not sure. I think she did. Yesterday, yeah, and she's doing a masterclass tomorrow. Unfortunately, it's sold out, but she's amazing, and it helps you really understand what's going on inside the brain of a player. So that's my favorite book about design, even though it's not about UI design specifically, it's about UX. I love it. And so, excuse me, what was your second question?
If you need to balance like informative value with, let's say, beauty, or you can always arrive to something.
It depends on what the feature is. If it's something that's gonna engage the player and make them spend, then you're gonna have to consider it differently. You need to be very clear and honest about what's going on to avoid dark patterns. And then in that case, you will prioritize information. If it's something supposed to make the player feel something, like fun, usually during gameplay, then you can prioritize like, you know, more aesthetic stuff.